My name is Mary, and I need to tell my story before it breaks me any more than it already has. If I don't, I'm afraid I might do something I can't take back. I'm sharing this here because there are others out there like me, people who carry the same guilt, the same burden, and the same regrets. I'm a single mother now, but once, I had everything. I lost it all because of a relationship I didn't want but couldn't resist. The result was a pregnancy I never expected, with a man I could never be with. I'm a twin. You wouldn't know unless you saw us together. My sister and I are identical. But we're completely different people. Martha, my sister, is the outgoing, successful one, while I've always been the quiet, introverted one. We were never as close as most twins, but I loved her deeply, even if I don't think she felt the same. Martha always seemed to be living the perfect life. She became a successful investment banker, married a man who was every woman's dream, and lived in a world I couldn't break into. George, her husband, was tall, dark, handsome, and wealthy. Everything about him was perfect, his looks, his charm, his kindness. And despite our differences, Martha let me into her life when I needed help the most. I was struggling. I couldn't keep a job for long, always clashing with my bosses. I went from one job to another, while Martha's life seemed to shine brighter and brighter. Out of desperation, I moved in with her and George. She offered to help me get my life together, but from the moment I moved in, I could feel the tension. Martha treated me like her subordinate, her little project. I hated it, but I had no other choice. But George, her husband, was different. He was kind to me in ways Martha never was. And that's where everything started to fall apart. 3 weeks after moving in, George got me a job at his law firm as the head of the IT department. It was a huge opportunity, and even though I wasn't sure why a law firm needed someone in IT, I was grateful. The pay was good, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like things were looking up. The office was a calm, beautiful place, and I quickly settled in. I was responsible for handling all the firm's tech needs and managing a small team. People respected me, and I started to enjoy the work. I even made friends, especially with Sandra, a junior attorney who seemed to know everything happening in the office. She became my closest friend, and through her, I heard all the gossip, some of it about George. Sandra told me about George's past, how he had an affair with his former assistant. At first, I brushed it off as office rumors, just another story Sandra had heard. She even hinted that George had once made advances toward her, but she turned him down. I laughed it off, thinking she was exaggerating. I mean, George was my sister's husband. He never showed me anything but kindness. But I started to notice things. George had a group of close friends at the firm, successful, attractive men who seemed to do everything together. They even had a say in who got hired, including me. They had a tight bond, and while I admired their success, I didn't realize that they played by their own set of rules. George, with all his charm and professionalism, kept things strictly business between us for the first year. There was no sign that anything inappropriate would happen. But then, slowly, things changed. After a year of living with Martha and working at the firm, I moved into my own apartment. That's when George started inviting me to dinner, at first, under the guise of work. He'd tell Martha it was business-related, and she never seemed suspicious. We'd go out to nice restaurants, talk about work, and laugh over dinner. It all felt harmless, and I didn't think much of it. But soon, these dinners stopped being about work. We'd talk about everything, sometimes even personal topics that went far beyond what was appropriate. I ignored the growing tension between us because, deep down, I thought nothing would happen. I owed George so much, my job, my independence, and he was Martha's husband. That line couldn't be crossed. Or so I thought. Looking back, I can see how naive I was. George knew exactly what he was doing. He preyed on my insecurities, my need for approval, and my gratitude toward him. His charm was overpowering, and I started to fall for him, even though I didn't want to admit it. Meanwhile, Sandra introduced me to David, a junior attorney at the firm. David was sweet, calm, and sincere, a complete opposite of George's intense, powerful presence. I started dating David, and for a while, it seemed like everything might fall into place. David was a good guy, and I told myself that I could build a future with him. But even as our relationship got more serious, I couldn't shake my feelings for George. David proposed to me after we'd been together for 6 months. It was a beautiful moment. He took me to our favorite restaurant and got down on one knee. I said yes, thinking that this was my chance to finally move on from everything that had happened with George. But even as I put on the engagement ring, a part of me still longed for the man I could never have. George didn't seem to care about my relationship with David at first. In fact, he was supportive, almost too supportive. He encouraged me to accept David's proposal, which should have made me feel relieved, but it didn't. Instead, it made me feel confused and unsettled. I thought George was finally letting me go. But I was wrong. After David proposed, George started to push boundaries again. He began inviting me to more dinners, and this time, they weren't business-related at all. We'd talk about our lives, our desires, things we should have never discussed. I didn't tell David, and I certainly didn't tell Martha. I knew it was wrong, but there was a part of me that didn't want it to end. That part of me still craved George's attention, no matter how forbidden it was. Then, one day, everything changed. George and I crossed the line we'd been tiptoeing around for so long. It happened at work, in his office. I was presenting a project I had been working on, and during the presentation, I noticed him staring at me in a way that made me uncomfortable, yet thrilled. After the meeting, he walked over to me, looked me in the eyes, and kissed me. I didn't stop him. That kiss opened the door to something I couldn't close. From that day on, George and I started an affair. We'd sneak around, meeting in secret, hiding from everyone. At first, it felt exciting, but soon, it became overwhelming. I was engaged to David, but every time I was with him, all I could think about was George. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. For a while, we managed to keep our affair hidden. But secrets like ours don't stay buried forever. The day everything came crashing down is one I'll never forget. George and I had been sneaking around for months, finding excuses to be together. We would leave the office early, plan fake work trips, anything to get away and keep feeding the forbidden connection we had. I knew it was dangerous, but I was too deep in it to stop. It all came to a head one afternoon. George and I had slipped away to our usual hotel, the one we thought nobody knew about. We were in the middle of it, he was taking me from behind, and the intensity of the moment had me completely lost. I didn't want it to stop, and from the way George moved, neither did he. My moans filled the room, the kind of sounds that come from wanting something you know you can't have, but you take anyway. We were both so absorbed in each other that we didn't hear the door open. Suddenly, George stopped. He jerked up like someone had poured cold water on him, and I turned around, confused. That's when I saw them. Martha and David were standing in the doorway, watching us. I'll never forget the looks on their faces, shock, betrayal, and heartbreak all at once. I froze. There was nothing I could say. No explanation, no apology, nothing could take back what they had just witnessed. David looked like someone had punched him in the gut, and without saying a word, he turned and walked away. I wanted to run after him, to explain, but what could I possibly say? Martha, on the other hand, didn't leave. She just stood there, staring at us, silent at first. Then the yelling began. She screamed at George, calling him every name under the sun, but she didn't even acknowledge me. I was just the other woman, the one who had betrayed her own sister. After what felt like hours of her shouting, she finally stormed out, leaving George and me alone in that room. That was the day I lost everything. George and I stood there in silence for what felt like forever. There was nothing left to say. He tried to comfort me, but it was useless. The damage was done. I had destroyed my relationship with David, shattered any trust Martha had in me, and ruined any chance of rebuilding my life. All for a man I could never have. The fallout was immediate. I resigned from the firm that same week, knowing I couldn't face anyone there ever again. The rumors spread quickly, and soon everyone knew what had happened. I packed up and left the city, moving far away with the little savings I had. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not David, not Martha, not even George. I just disappeared. 1 month after moving away, I found out I was pregnant. I was devastated. The last thing I wanted was to carry a child from a man who had torn my life apart. I considered terminating the pregnancy, but my doctor advised against it, and deep down, I knew I couldn't go through with it. So, I kept the baby. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I was completely alone, living in a new city where nobody knew me, struggling to make ends meet. I jumped from one job to another, just trying to survive. And all the while, I carried this pregnancy, this reminder of everything I had lost and everything I had done. When my daughter was born, I felt a rush of emotions I wasn't prepared for. She was innocent, a beautiful baby who had no part in the mess I had made. But every time I looked at her, I saw George. She had his eyes, his features, and it killed me inside to know that I had brought her into the world through such betrayal. Martha never forgave me. She cut me out of her life completely. I haven't spoken to her in 10 years, and I don't even know if she knows she has a niece. As for David, I never heard from him again after that day in the hotel. He broke off the engagement, and that was the end of our story. I don't blame him. How could I? I've spent the last 10 years raising my daughter on my own, struggling to make a life for us. I've been in and out of jobs, just trying to give her the best I can. But it's been hard. Every day is a reminder of what I had and what I lost because of a choice I made when I wasn't strong enough to walk away. It's been 10 years since that day, and I still live with the consequences. My daughter is my world now, and I've tried to build a life for her, but the guilt never goes away. I can't forget what I did or the people I hurt. Martha has no idea she has a niece, and I don't think she'll ever want to know. Our relationship, already fragile, was shattered the moment she saw me with George. David moved on. I've heard from mutual friends that he got married a few years ago. He deserves happiness, and I hope he found someone who can give him the love and loyalty I couldn't. As for George, we haven't spoken since I left the city. I don't know what happened between him and Martha, and I don't care to know. That chapter of my life is closed, but the scars remain. Raising my daughter on my own hasn't been easy. I've gone from job to job, struggling to keep things stable for her. She's a beautiful girl, full of life and innocence, and she doesn't know anything about her father or the story behind her birth. One day, I know I'll have to tell her, but I'm not ready for that conversation yet. I just want to protect her from the mistakes I made. Looking back, I realize how much I let desire and weakness take over my life. I had a chance at happiness with David, but I threw it away for something I knew I could never have. George was a fantasy, and I fell for it, destroying everything I cared about in the process. I traded a future with a good man for a brief, forbidden affair, and I've been paying the price ever since. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't think I deserve it. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the choices we make in moments of weakness can define the rest of our lives. I've spent a decade trying to rebuild what I lost, but some things can never be fixed. To anyone listening, please don't make the same mistake I did. If you find yourself in a situation where your heart is pulling you in the wrong direction, think about the people you'll hurt, the lives you'll shatter. Walk away before it's too late. Don't let desire destroy everything you've worked for. Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more stories like this, click on the video you see on your screen, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content.